Hello and welcome to week 4 for management and leadership approaches. Well, week 4 marks sort of the halfway point through the class, and by this time you should start having an idea about what the goals and objectives are, as well as the material that we're going to be working with. So I haven't had many questions recently, so I hope that things are going well. What we're going to be doing this week is first starting out with a little bit of a humorous cartoon. What do leaders do? All right. So, what do leaders do? Well, what we're going to be doing is exploring that through our assigned readings as well as our outside readings. You're based upon your research. So the two assignments, the discussion as well as the paper, are somewhat related, and that's what I try to do. I try to link them together so you're writing about what you've been talking about during the week. So based upon your readings, the assigned readings and outside readings, describe two approaches to leadership that appear innovative. And notice that we're not saying leading innovation, but leadership approaches that appear to be innovative. And what makes them innovative? Why is innovation required in the situation that you're describing? Okay. Now this is going to be based upon your readings. That's what it says, first sentence, based upon your readings. So you're going to have to do some research, deciding what you want to talk about here. And then at the end, after you've described what the research says about innovative leadership, then you're going to be able to use your own experience to illustrate that idea by describing an event that required innovative leadership. So, as with all assignments in the DBA program, we always start from what the experts and authorities have said, and then after we've explained that, then we try to apply our own example experience to demonstrate that we really understand it and we're able to apply it. And the same will be true with our week 4 paper. Now this is going to be concerning issues that leadership researchers are dealing with, what they're writing about, what the current thinking in leadership is. So you're to write a 5 to 7 page paper which looks at some of the major issues that concern leadership or / management researchers. I would like the paper to be written professionally, but with the terminology and explanations that a layperson could understand. So you could hand it to your spouse or your somebody you know, a close friend, and say, could you read this? Can you understand what it says? And if they said, no, I can't understand what it says, you're not writing for a layperson. All right? Page requirements are fixed, they are important, and so considering what the topic is that you're going to be dealing with, you're going to need to write in a precise fashion. So pay attention to the requirements. As I said in the video, sometimes the requirements are flexible, meaning this is just a guideline. Sometimes the requirements are fixed. In this case, it's fixed. I don't want to see anything less than 5 pages. I don't want to see anything more than 7 pages. And this is referring to the body of the paper. It doesn't count the title page. It doesn't count the reference list. Okay? But the body of the paper should be 5, 6, or 7 pages long. You may have to revise to make sure you fit within those requirements, but that's part of the exercise. The assignment says based upon research. These are peer-reviewed journal articles, some of which are supplied with the assignment for this week. Now, the purpose of this paper is for you to report on what researchers are publishing. It's not to talk about what you think the main issues are. This is to talk about what the people who are writing and publishing in the field think the issues are. Your personal experience, although you may feel it quite valuable, is not required for this assignment. You're not trying to apply it to what you think is important. We're trying to find out what the people who write in the field think is important. The type of language that's used and the organization and structure for the paper should be available, accessible to a non-professional audience. The person should not have to be in a DBA program in leadership, should not have had to read books and articles about leadership. You're going to break it down for them so they can explain what the issues in leadership are today. As if you were at a cocktail party or something, and somebody asked you what you were doing. You said you were taking your doctorate in business organizational leadership, and they said, "Oh, really? Well, so what is that? What's going on?" And then you proceeded to explain to them what the main areas of interest in the field were, who the main researchers were that were doing that, in a way that the person would say, "Oh, that sounds pretty interesting. I would be may have to look something up on that." Okay, avoid jargon. Explain. When you're using necessary terminology to explain something, you may have to break it down and explain it in a simpler fashion. Try to write in a straightforward, non-confusing, non-complex fashion. And then, of course, this is an APA requirement paper. You need to use APA format and referencing requirements. Now, again, I hope all of you saw the video, Scholarly Writing Part 2 that I put together for you. If you haven't, take a look at it. If you have, maybe take a look at it again, because here I'm going to be going through what I might see as a possible outline for this paper. And remember, that's one of the things I first said, is I said you don't sit down and start typing away at the keyboard. You develop an outline based upon the research. So a possible outline, of course, is going to have a title page. You may not even know what the title of it's going to be yet, but you know, you're going to need one of those eventually. You're also going to have to put together an introduction, and this, for me, is an absolute requirement. Any paper longer than 2 pages needs to have a separate area that's considered the introduction and labeled as such. And the introduction should talk about what the topic of the paper is, why that topic is important, and how the paper that you're going to be writing is going to address the topic. Many times a reader may only look at the introduction to decide whether or not they want to read the paper. They may read the introduction and the conclusion. So those are extremely important in terms of hooking the reader into wanting to read the rest of it, to find out about it. So those of you who kind of start writing the body of the paper without an introduction are going to find that that isn't going to work for me. You need to write an introduction, and it needs to cover these 3 areas. The length of the introduction should kind of fit with the length of the paper that you're writing. So if this paper is a 5 to 7 page one, you don't want to spend 2 pages writing the introduction. A half a page should be plenty for the introduction, but it should cover in enough detail so that if I read the introduction, I should know what you're going to be writing about, I should know why this topic is considered important, and I should have an understanding about how your paper is going to proceed. In that way, as I'm reading the paper, I can see, are you doing what you said you were going to do in the introduction? If you get wildly off topic, or you don't follow the steps that you said you were going to follow, then something's obviously wrong. Okay, so the introduction is extremely important. Then we get into the body of the paper, and for this particular paper, you might break it down into several different parts. For example, you might start with the first part that talks about, so when we're talking about research in leadership, what do we actually mean? What does that term even mean? Okay, because that may not mean anything to the normal person. What kind of research and leadership, what would that even mean? So you've got to, again, based upon the literature, come up with a definition and explanation of what does the field entail, and then you're going to move on into your issues that you decided to talk about. So, for example, you might have found, based upon your reading, that leading in times of rapid change is a current issue that people are interested in. They're developing leadership approaches to deal with rapid change. So your first issue would be in a separate category, separate section of your paper, and it would deal with leading in times of rapid change. Then you would move on to your next issue. You might say, how about leading across national borders and cultures? A lot of people seem to be interested in that and are writing in the research papers about what we call cross-cultural leadership. And then for a third issue, you might have chosen what we were talking about earlier, which is leading innovation. If firms have to innovate to stay competitive, what sort of skills, leadership skills, are necessary to be successful in leading innovation? And again, this is all based upon what the writing literature says. This is not based upon what you think. This is based upon what the people who are writing about it are saying. Then, of course, you're going to need to write a conclusion, which kind of summarizes what the paper was about and any conclusions that you have about it. And finally, your reference list. Now it looks like a lot, and remember this has to fit within the 5 to 7 pages. That's a fixed requirement. So you're going to have to be fairly precise in the way that you do this. Okay? You might say, well, how many topics do I have to write about? Could I write about just one topic? If you think that that's the way to go, that's fine. Okay? If you decide 2 is the way to go, that's fine. But I would recommend that if you go beyond 3, you're going to have a hard time adequately talking about them within the number of pages that you have available. All right, so that follows our kind of guidelines as you should write an outline before you start writing the paper. And this is just a possible one, a sample. I'm not saying these are the topics that you want to cover. I'm just saying, following the video recommendations, this would be the step after you do some preliminary research, is to start to develop your outline. So, the keys to success. Go back and look at the last paper, the week 2 paper. The things that I commented on and said you were doing well, we'll try to do those again. The things that I commented on and said try to avoid doing this, or you need to do this but you're not doing it, try to avoid the bad things. Go back and review the Scholarly Writing Part 2 video. You should be very familiar with that, so when I talk about the outline, what's your outline look like, you would say, well, I know exactly what my outline is. I know what my preliminary research is. I know what my follow-up research is. So that video basically lays out how I want the paper to be written. Start working on the paper early enough so that you'll have time for revisions. As I've said many times, a number of authors have said that great writing is 10% creativity and 90% revisions. And so those of you who kind of start working on Sunday afternoon and finish up midnight on Sunday probably aren't leaving enough time to redo it. Okay? So try to plan your time to get the preliminary stuff done, do the research when you have an opportunity, put the outline together, and then so at the very end where you have to start doing the rough draft, you'll have time to take that and finish it off. So until next time, goodbye and good luck, and if you have any questions, be sure and get in touch with me.